Welcome to Read This. I am your host, Alice James, and today we have Dr. Joanne Jenkins, the author or contributing author to the book Insecure, Awkward, and Winning. What a remarkable title. Welcome, Dr. Jenkins. How are you?
Thank you. I'm well. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yes. But as I said, I love the title of the book. Before we jump into the book and your TED Talk and all the amazing things that you're doing, I would love for you to give the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, I will say that this is just a snapshot. I'm naturally collaborative and I love, working with folks. And I feel like there are always like new dimensions to learn about people and new things that constantly emerge. But if I would just to take a bit to share about myself, born and raised in Philadelphia, which I think is huge because I was born in a space where we just have a lot of culture, a lot of arts, a lot of community, and an understanding, like an inherent understanding of like democracy and inclusion. There are a lot of cultures here. So I grew up just being surrounded by people who were very proud to be who they were and very proud to bring all of the dynamic intricacies about their culture to a larger conversation. So I also attended Howard University, was on faculty at Howard University, worked in the advertising industry for many years as an art director, creative director. And I bring a lot of those perspectives, those skills, those framework, that theory into the work that I do now. So I worked in academia as a professor and as an administrator, as an associate dean, working in the industry, bringing those perspectives as a practitioner, and now working as a consultant in those spaces of transforming a lot of the information that we have in this information age into knowledge and strategies and practice, and really an opportunity to reimagine. I'm really passionate about corporate social responsibility. I'm really passionate about ESG, and I'm really passionate about using advertising, using entertainment, using media as a catalyst for transformation within individuals, our relationships, and within society.
Let me just ask you really quick to say what ESG is.
Environmental, social, and governance. So when we look at corporations, we look at, it's a very interesting time right now. I feel like it always is, but this is something very historical about the time that we're at right now. And we see a lot of trends and forecasts amongst younger consumer groups, amongst very influential consumer groups, and just generally within our audiences where people are demanding and wanting more ethical practices and procedures. And so in this age of transparency and information, it becomes an opportunity to really work and collaborate with businesses, work with brands, work with agencies to make sure that we are creating ethical products, that we have an ethical workplace, that we have a healthy understanding of philanthropy, and that we're contributing to our environment in ways that sustain our climate, our world. Going back to being from Philadelphia, I remember I was a member of the Black Environmental Protection Agency. Like, we grew up testing our water at, Schuylkill and having block parties and setting up tables and telling people about clean water and all of those things. So it's definitely something that I'm very passionate about and look to bring all of those ideas and perspectives into the solutions that we create.
Wow, I appreciate that. I actually lived in Philly for about 9 months, and I attended Mother Bethel Church And yes, Philly has such a rich history, as well as just people that are rooted. You know, their roots go deep, and they're very proud of being from Philly. And I loved all that I learned during my time in Philly. It was just, it was a eye-opening experience. So I could see why you would be proud of growing up there. I would see that.
Yeah. I love Mother Bethel. I was actually involved in their art project to honor the slave burial ground,
Hmm.
where they were able to trace back some of the roots from the burial ground. And we actually made like small art pieces. We made fans, some people made angels, some people made all of these just kind of like really nice offerings. And it was a very beautiful project that they spearheaded.
So, what was the inspiration for advertising?
That's an excellent question. And it's so funny because I feel like that's going to go back to Philadelphia too. I had the opportunity to attend the Philadelphia High School for Girls. And it's a primarily like academic and oriented educational institution, has a lot of tradition, a lot of heritage. And I remember attending the career fair. This is actually really interesting because you see a lot of the underpinnings of my work and some of the things that I'm interested in. So one of the things that I really love to champion is career exposure for historically excluded communities. Sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. And throughout my entire life, I always had a passion for the arts. And as I mentioned, it was something that was supported within my community. I was blessed to be able to have that be supported within my home as well. But I didn't know that that could actually be a career path. Like what I actually thought about the arts was being an artist. And I knew that I didn't necessarily want to be an artist per se. And I went to a career fair and they spoke about advertising. They spoke about the ability to be creative, the ability to use technology, and the ability to use strategy. And that was something that really resonated with me. When I found out that it was actually a career that I could have, a career where I could make impact, a career that was exciting and vibrant, and where I could work with people that were also excited and creative and strategic, I was definitely sold. It was interesting when I was in high school, I had the opportunity to participate in the Freedom Ride. It was a commemoration of the Freedom Riders, who were very instrumental in the civil rights movement. And one of the major messages that I experienced in that transformational summer was come as you are. Whatever talents you have, come as you are and use those talents. And that will help in creating a society and creating a world for everyone to be able to thrive. And so when I heard about advertising, it reminded me of that. It was this idea where I could come as I was and use all of my talents. I didn't have to, I thought about, I've always been really passionate about history, but I said, well, if I become a history teacher, what will become of my art? What will become of my strategy? I was also pretty curious about math and science. I've always loved math and science, but that was creative. But again, having the exposure to those careers that I'm thinking like, being a mathematician, what does that look like as a career? So definitely when I was connected to advertising, it was something that struck a nerve with me. And because I knew of the just like colossal impact of advertising, I had my own agenda as well. I was like, this is something that could this is something that could change everything.
I
So
love the fact that you had an agenda going in. That I love. I love that. I in with the advertising and the math and the analytics. So the analytics, hearing you talk about analytics really inspired me because I recently was certified. I got a business certification recently, and it was teaching us how to use the internet to build our business. And
Mhm.
I quickly realized that a lot of the strategies that I was being given didn't benefit me in the same way. And I was in a global classroom. It was 900 of us taking this course. And so it was very diverse, but it was still predominantly Caucasian.
Mhm.
And when I did my labs and things like that, some of the things that other people got from it, I couldn't get because, first of all, I couldn't find my tribe
Mhm.
to connect with to promote their information, because you're like, oh, find a topic and promote that topic, and I'm like, well, I'm not promoting the Kardashians.
Yeah.
Then that's what's trending, or whatever was trending was not what I was looking to comment on. And I was just like, well, where I find our stuff is at page 1000 in the Google search.
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, something's wrong. But then I was like, maybe you just don't understand. But then I saw your TED talk and I did some reading on what you had to say. And I'm like, okay, Alice, you're not crazy. So I became deeply interested in how you began to wrap your mind around what was going on.
This is such a good question. And I think that you're so right. Like when you're experiencing these things, you're like, like you have that moment where like, am I the only person that's experiencing this? Like, especially when it's positioned as something that seems so inherently right or normal. That's one thing that I know about advertising is that it contributes to our ideals of what is normal. And what's normal for one person is not normal for everyone. And what is normal is sometimes a strategy that people actually fall into after a while. Like when you start to peel back some of the layers of what is normal, you really see a foundation for demand creation. So I think some of that thinking came for me with just like really being bold about lived experience. Lived experience and acknowledging multiple perspectives is critical, because when you kind of lean into that, and then I think the next step with lived experience is the frequency of that lived experience, right? How many other people are having a similar experience as this? And I think that helps to not only authenticate, but to give momentum to what you're experiencing. I think a few years now, probably more than a few years, I feel like we've been a little bit of a time warp, but I feel like probably since 2010, 2005, a lot of the data has come back saying that there is no general population, right? That if we really look at our demographics, we started hearing some of those early whispers about the browning of America and about how the demographic shifts were taking place where there wasn't an inherent general market. Also, when you look at general market, we see now that age is such a defining characteristic, creating these generational cohorts that may think differently than how people were previously segmented based on like racial characteristics or racial identifiers. So I think knowing that really helped me to lean into that lived experience. I was like, well, there is no general market, even though there's a lot of rhetoric that says there's a general market, like this idea that there is a they. And it's like, well, who is they? Because they thinks differently. But it was still, I think, the norm perpetuating this idea that there was a general market. But I knew that off of the data, like there is no general market, and there hasn't been a general market for decades. And so with that, I was like curious if other people were having similar experiences, and kind of just like curious to dig into the research, dig into the numbers, and see like what are these trends amongst audiences that people aren't always looking at. You know, these audiences are really interesting, and maybe we'll talk about these audiences forthcoming, but like these audiences in many instances are trendsetters, they're tastemakers. Like on one extreme, they're super powerful, and on the other extreme, they're incredibly vulnerable and can be dissuaded, right, by this idea that no one thinks the way you think. It's like, actually, there are a lot of people who think this way. So I think that that was something that really motivated me, looking at the numbers, knowing that there was not a general market, and then leaning into that lived experience, and then being curious about who else is having this experience. And then I think some of those guardrails started popping up.
That's very, very interesting. There's just so much there that I would love to unpack. So the name of the book is Insecure, Awkward, and Winning. Can you tie that together a little bit for me?
The title specifically, or
the title, your research, advertising?
Well, I will say that so this book, I would say this creative project was definitely something that came about through like love for like Black scholarship and collaboration. Really being in this space of living like your values. And some of my friends and I, we all like love research. We all love like pop culture. We love media. It's what we do, but it's also things that we enjoy. And I think that sometimes within these very hierarchical or like deeply entrenched academic spaces, there's sometimes preconceived notions about what should be studied, what's important, what's not important. And so this was an opportunity to create a space for people to have conversations about what they thought was important, an opportunity for us to empower ourselves, empower people who wanted to participate in the conversation. It was really a catalyst to have deeper, more meaningful conversations about specific issues that people found important. And it was a great opportunity to work with people that we were friends. And, you know, a lot of times, I hope that we get to have more spaces like that moving forward, but a lot of times it's, you know, these very segmented aspects of your personality. And this was an opportunity to really embrace and create a project that had a level of wholeness that allowed us to bring fun and research and collaboration and friendship. And we saw that mimicked in the work itself. Like Insecure, in many instances, depending on who you ask about it, this is a story about friendship. And so it was really interesting that we got together as friends and wanted to create this space to have a deeper conversation. We presented some work at a conference where we were all bringing together our different perspectives. Like I was talking about indistinguishable advertising and the impact of vulnerable audiences. Other people were talking about storytelling. Some people were talking about sexuality and identity. Some people were talking about gender. And when we brought together all of our experiences, we had this really deep and robust conversation. And then when we shared this conversation with the audience, they brought in their perspectives. It just really created this catalyst for provocative conversation. And we wanted to continue that so that it could deeply impact the public sphere as well as curriculum. Because a lot of times, even in terms of what gets studied, there's sometimes, that's a whole different story, right? Like you just
there's a mold. There's a mold, and they've squashed everything into that mold.
Exactly. So like decolonizing curricula and even talking about things that are contemporary. And so it was really an opportunity to contribute to that as well. So framing it with like researchers, practitioners, influencers, media professionals, everyone bringing their perspectives into this space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I like about the title is the fact that you can be insecure, you can be awkward, and you can still be winning. So that is a powerful statement in and of itself.
That is huge. And that's an excellent point. I'm so glad that you brought that up. That's a catalyst for the conversation, for the book, and even so editing the book and also contributing to the book and framing the book, and wanting there to be that element of humanity, right? Because a lot of times when we talk about race and when we start to address racial conversations within media and all of the rhetoric that supports that regarding, private versus public, what Black people should be doing, as if, there's just there's a lot of that. When I say Black people, I'm saying that in that context of like racial conversations, because we know, to your point and to what the title echoes, is that there is humanity, there is diversity, there is beauty and power in that, and really deconstructing this monolithic perspective as if there is a Black people, when we see this myriad and beauty of resilience and dimension of humanity. And so that insecure, awkward, and winning is a play on that. And then also bringing in the technology, like we see insecure is lowercase. When we see winning, we see the pound in front of it, like speaking to the hashtag. And what's really important about that is being able to have that conversation about how the democratization of technology and this birth of two-way media communications really allowed more of the humanity to be able to be more easily perceived in the public. Help to break down a lot of those stereotypes.
Right. Yes, that's what I get from what you're saying, is like we are fed a one version of ourselves, and this has been a bone of contention for me for a very long time. Even now, where we have a lot of Black networks, it still feels like we have one vision of who we are. Yes. When I can change the channel and go to the History Channel and see history about other people, other nationalities, and other than just slavery, but there's History Channel, there's family channels, there you can see other people in love, you can see fathers and daughters, you can see a myriad of opportunity in others' lives, the fullness, the wholeness of other people's lives. But when it comes to us, there is seemingly the single Black mom, and the struggle is real, that's it. And it's not only that, we have that same tremendous amount of diversity. And the fact that you have the data to back it up it encourages me, because Like you said, quite often we feel like, am I the only person that thinks like this? Am I the only person that's seeing this? Am I the only person that's upset about this?
Mhm.
And then when I see someone like you that says, no, 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 there's data showing that there's an interest in this in other places.
Mhm.
So you had a very impactful TED Talk
Mhm.
about our power as consumers. Can we step into that a little bit, and you can share what you wanted people to take away from?
Oh, thank you. The TED Talk, I think the biggest takeaway for me, my desire, was corporate social responsibility. This idea that we can reimagine spaces to create more inclusion, and that it doesn't have to be either or, it can be both. You know, I'm hoping, in this reimagine, in fact, not hoping, I'm wanting to get to this space where we have this revolutionary change and this revolutionary shift. And in the road to that, we'll have this incremental, this incremental shift, this incremental progress. And that's what I want people to take away from that small changes lead to big things. And a small change under the right circumstance is a big change, right? Like individually, interpersonally, institutionally. So like small decisions that you make as a consumer, we have a history, we have a legacy of voting with our dollars. Your voice matters. You can purchase. We saw this in many of the watershed moments in 2020 when people decided to say that I'm going to purchase from a Black-owned space, or I'm going to make sure before I support this store that we understand their supplier diversity chain. I'm going to make sure that I am going to go to restaurants that circulate, money in particular areas. That we have choices about those things, that if I'm going to shop online, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to promote or support this business. So this idea that you can chunk, these big ideas of change and reimagination to things that you can do personally, and you can build that momentum so that you can connect those dots. You can want companies to be ethical, but you can also embody the characteristics and demand that they be ethical, and create what you want to create.
I so agree with that, because you never know who's going to be that tipping point. You might just be that tipping point to get the scale to the other side. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things that's really, I think, inspirational about what's going on now is that we see the years of working to reduce, and not to say that it is like reduced in the ways that we want it to be, but we start to see the years of working towards deconstructing occupational hierarchies, right? And so not only do we see ourselves as consumers, but we are also consumers that work inside of institutions. And so it's interesting because you have these internal and external forces at the same time that could be the tipping point that you're referring to. So like we may have, very powerful BRGs, like the business resource groups that work internally in an organization, or affinity groups that say, hey, we want to support this, or, chief diversity officers, or even just not even someone who has that title, but someone who is passionate about those ideas and those values, and they work within an institution and they see like, hey, there are some consumers that really want these initiatives, and they promote those agendas and those initiatives from the inside as well. And so that's something that's exciting, because we start to, with some transparency, we start to see how some of that change can evolve internally and externally working together.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And I love how multifaceted you are. The arts and the analytics and the math, the whole thing. And that really appeals to me. I have an art background, and um, is sometimes you know, in measuring and numbers, you quite often people don't really think about the math of it all, but
Mhm.
there is a lot of math in making clothes
Mhm.
that people don't really connect math to an artistic career.
Mhm.
So the fact that you bring that together in such a clear understanding for people.
Mhm.
So I know we had talked prior to our prior to coming on about STEM and STEAM.
Mhm.
I would love for you to share with the audience STEM and the connection of STEM and STEAM, because I just think I had never heard of STEAM, and you just got me so excited. So I want everybody else to be as excited as I am.
Yes, I am very excited. Also very excited about your work. Someone from like to your point of not knowing about all of the math. I remember I used to, in one of my many jobs, I worked as a packaging designer at Tops. And I remember getting the SKUs and saying like, okay, like trying to figure out all that math. And I grew up sewing. So understanding a pattern, understanding how to conceptualize something in my head, understanding that like, okay, objects are always going to have a front, it's always going to have a back. How does it look from the side? Like the arts are just amazing in terms of being able to teach you how to think and use your imagination, how to visualize. And that is something that I'm very passionate about, and I think ties into some of the work that we were speaking about before, is really making sure that people have career exposure, particularly youth, from historically excluded populations, and even pivoting career professionals. So that was really a pathway for me into STEAM. A lot of the things we do, right? Like we embody them, but we don't necessarily know like, oh, I can actually do this. Like how many times have I seen, students drawing the most amazing, little doodle, and then they ball it up and throw it in the trash. And I said, wait a minute, you could put that in your portfolio. What are you doing? And they're like, this? I'm like, you can be an animator, you can be a sketch artist. Like there's so many things, like this can become something else. So STEAM, science, technology, engineering, math, but bringing the art into that. And when I say bringing the art into that, I sometimes think about that as like all of the people that I represent, or like I started off as an art teacher, thinking about my students, or thinking about, people who may just need a push, even working within academia and being an academic and career advisor, and having people come back afterwards, after they were already 3 years into their degree, and saying, I think I chose the wrong major. Or I'm a creative. It's like, well, what does that mean? Like everyone's creative, and you need to be deeply rooted in the understanding that you are. And I think your decisions from understanding that you are may be different, as opposed to thinking that, either not knowing about certain career paths, or thinking that that's not for you because you might not look like what people look like in that space. And so that's critically important. That goes back to the twofold thing that like these institutions, these agencies, these brands, they're trying to solve problems that vulnerable audiences or vulnerable populations or excluded populations inherently have the solutions for. So it's like we need to get together and have this conversation and see the outcomes from that. So STEAM is just an awesome, not just, but for me is a pathway to have very talented, very passionate, people involved in things that they are intrinsically talented in. So I've worked in spaces where I've created programs, where I've created curriculum, where I've worked on career exposure, where I've created internship opportunities for youth, for adults, for pivoting professionals to have exposure to careers in STEAM and STEM, particularly STEAM. So it's just like we're taking this idea of STEM and now we're inserting the arts into it and just seeing how it blossoms. Yeah.
I love you for that. I mean, you don't know, because quite often when I talk to people in the STEM world, it feels like it wants to exclude the arts. And as I was a technical designer for like over 30 years, and a sweater technical designer, which we don't use patterns. All of how you make a sweater is just numbers, basically. It's calculations. If you go to a factory, you'll see a room full of people just on their calculators calculating what I tell them they need to do. It's calculations. And to be able to take those calculations and turn it into a garment. And so if you know math, you know, quite often people assume if you're in the arts, then that math aspect of it does not apply to you, which I know very strongly that's wrong, because even if you're a merchandiser, you're always, how was our sales? What caused this? What was year to date? There is tons of math in everything we do, and it does flow into the arts. So the fact that you're able to show how math works in advertising is a wonderful stepping stone.
That's an excellent point. I mean, that goes back to what we were talking about before about stereotypes, right? And being interconnected. Like someone will look at you and say, you're a Black woman. Someone will look at you and say, you're an artist. Someone will say, you're a designer. But then someone will say, well, you can't be an artist or a designer because you're a Black woman. You know, and it's those stereotypes. And I think a lot of it are those roles. And that's one of the reasons why I'm super passionate about technology, is because it breaks down those roles. Because when we see, like you were talking about, a lot of those conversations in, you know, technology in specific geographic areas, widespread, but also in specific geographic areas, they have ideas about who should be consumers and who should be creators. You know, who needs to be behind here making up the algorithms and the formulas, and then who just needs to buy products. Well, I think that's not going to work.
Right. Yeah.
It's absolutely not going to work.
This was such a wonderful, informative conversation. I kind of feel like you're a kindred spirit. There's just so much about the way you think that I totally connect with. And I thank you for being you, and I thank you for having the courage and the tenacity, and I'm sure a lot of resilience to keep stepping into all of these things and knowing that everything you do builds onto the next. And
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I can't even take credit for it, because I can also say, like, I've had so many powerful mentors, and they've given me so much, you know, in addition to the work. And like you mentioned, the resilience. One piece of advice that I received that was so critical for me in my career was, don't be afraid to change your paintbrush. Right? Like, you know, being a painter and thinking like, oh, I've just kind of mastered painting and I've just mastered these painting techniques. And then going into graphic design, and then from growing into graphic design, going into research, and then going into research and going into analytics, anything else. But this idea that it really is your mind that's empowering you, and that you can move forward in that direction. You don't have to be limited to stereotypes.
And I'm very happy, especially for your generation, because quite often, my generation, you were really locked in. It's just like when you started doing this one thing, although you brought so much more to the table, you were into these silos, and then the companies never got to see the full breadth of what you brought to the table. Um, and to see that changing in recent years where there is that cross, I call it cross pollination, and I'm all about that, that if things don't sit in one silo, we're all many different things.
Mm-hmm.
We are all many different things. So how do we weave these things together? How do we knit these pieces of our personalities and our characters together? Before we wrap up, I would like to know, is there something else that you'd like to share with the audience?
I do feel like that we could chat forever. I think one of the things that just resonated with me with what you just said is like my research is deeply rooted in convergence. This idea that we are in a converged space, that there's a convergence of technology, media, and culture that's creating a force that's really shaping and deconstructing and just influencing at such a massive space. And I think if there's one thing is that to look at challenges, crises, problems, always framed as opportunities. And how can you use these opportunities to reimagine spaces and create better lived experiences and better realities?
Oh, excellent. I love that. One of the terms that I heard years ago that I always try to, when I want to give up on something, say it's too hard. Someone said, don't wish it was easy, wish you were better.
Yes.
So I heard that in what you're saying. It's just like, okay, this is a challenge. How do I become better in order to win at this challenge? It is so amazing talking to you. I love talking,
Likewise, thank you so much. It's been such an honor and pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you for joining the conversation with Dr. Joanne Jenkins, the contributing author of Insecure, Awkward, and Winning. Please follow Dr. Jenkins' work because she is definitely one of the critical thinkers of our time. This has been Read This, Author's Corner, and I am your host, Alice James. Until next time.